Hi, this is David Carrasso. I'm going to be showing you my app called Power Actions, and I'll be taking you line by line through it and explain how you too can build an app like this. What this app does is add workflow actions to any event. So I'll give you an example. Let's do a search. Doing a search for install errors on my Macintosh. I get back a bunch of events. I want to look at the details of this event. Now, under event actions, you'll see all these ones with the up arrow right here. These are new, and these were added by my app, and we're going to learn how to do that. We're going to search for plus or minus 2 seconds, and what that does is it takes the time from that event and creates a window of the earliest and latest time, 2 seconds, and now I can see all the events that were around that original error. So I can see there are all sorts of interesting things. 3 install scripts were run. Socket is not connected. Nothing found to load. And if I knew anything, that would be really interesting. I don't, but that would be really interesting. Okay, now we're in an editor. We're currently in the Splunk directory. Let's go to etc apps, and the name of this particular app is Power Actions, but for legacy reasons the directory name is Workflow for the app. There are 3 directories at the top level of the app. There's App Server Default and Metadata. We'll go through each one in detail. Let's start off with metadata, because that's the most simple for right now. It's a directory with one file called default.meta, and it simply says that workflow actions, that's the name of what these actions right here are called, that these workflow actions can be read by everybody and written by admin, and they're exported to system. This basically means that they're available to any app, and that's it for metadata. Let's go to default. We have 3 files here. We have app.conf, web.conf, and workflowactions.conf. So app.conf should be familiar to you. It's a standard little little config file that basically says this app is not visible in the UI. So what that means is when you go into, it won't show up as one of the apps here. Because there's no need to. It's basically an app that provides functionality to all other apps. Most of your apps will not be like this. Most of them will say is visible is true, but this app and the time wrap app that I did, both are apps that are sort of subservient to other apps. They just add a little bit of functionality to every other app. So is visible was false, 0 is false. Label, you just give it a name, Power Actions, author, description, version, install, and the name of the action, the name of the app itself. If you're confused about what these mean, or for any config file, what you can do is go to etc system readme, and then the name of the config file. So let's go to app.conf spec, and let's say we want to look at what build does. So we're just going to search for the word build right here. It says it's required, it has to be a positive integer, and you increment it whenever you deal with app server static. Great. Okay, so that is app.conf. We have web.conf. Okay, so what this is going to do, this is not a typical thing, but this app is not a typical app. What it does is it adds workflow actions to each event, and it does that by creating a custom Python endpoint. What that means is there is a URL that you can go to basically, it's right here, workflow. You can see that it was even being called. So this is a custom endpoint that Splunk is calling my code. And so all you're doing by saying web.conf and saying endpoint related is just saying this app is creating a custom Python REST endpoint called related. The name is meaningless for historical reasons, but basically the idea was to, given an event, find related events. So if we were to go back, one of the things here is find similar formatting. So the whole intent of this was to find similar kind of events. So the REST endpoint was called related. The last one, workflow actions. What this does, this defines all of these workflow actions. The names of the stanzas is not so important. I put them in a particular order so that they show up in a particular order. Search unique values. Search unique values is Z1. See how this, it's alphabetical, but I wanted it to be the last on the menu. So I gave it a nice name starting with Z. But then there's 1, 2, 3, and so on. So the order is alphabetical. Then the type is a link. So what that means is that it's going to link to somewhere else. Again, if you're unfamiliar with what it means, you can always go to system readme and then workflow action spec and type, and you can see the type of workflow. If it's not set, Splunk skips this. The type is we should have better docs than that. That's kind of disappointing. Okay, so display location, that's event menu. So display location, you can either set it to field menu, event menu, or both. So most of these are event menu, and what that means is it shows up here as a menu item for the event, but some of them show up under here as actions, or right over here as actions for a particular field, and I'll explain that in a minute. The label is just the name of the action right here. This little up arrow is actually a valid character that I found on the web. It makes it kind of cute, so you can sort of distinguish all my workflow actions. Then there's the URI. So when I click on this, it's determining where I'm going. Like what is the URL the browser going to go to? So it's going to go to your Splunk instance, which is localhost :8000. This is going to go to /custom/workflow, so that's the name of our app, /related, that's our endpoint, that's our Python code, and then question mark, and then a whole bunch of arguments that you want. Now what's interesting to see, look for the $sign. If you'll see $@ SID, $@ offset, $@ namespace, these are values that the UI will put in place of those and when it's called. So $@ SID, rather than this literal string $@ SID $, what you'll have in there is the search ID. So let's see if we can see it. It is right here. It's the SID. You can see it right here in the URL for my search. That's a unique ID that allows your code to get the events from the ID and the offset. So the offset for this event is 0, and if I go to the next page and so on, the offset for this would be 20 or 21, and so on. So these values are filled in. So offset, SID, namespace, that's the name of the app. And if your REST endpoint doesn't need it, then you clearly don't have to pass these arguments in. But what I'm saying is basically, I want when you click on this one, I want you to go to my related code that's in the workflow app and type type is my own argument. It's called alert values. So this is just an argument that I hard code there. Each of these has their own. See, alert equals identifying terms, identifying values, punctuation, and so on. And then ampersand and a whole bunch of arguments that Splunk will fill in for me. And then finally, the link.target is self, and what that means is that when I click on this, I want it to go into this same window. The result should be opened in this window as opposed to opening in a separate window or a new tab. Most of these are the same. They're almost exactly the same, except the type has different values. There's two exceptions here. See, they're all on the event menu, event menu, event menu, and now we have two down here that have field menu. So what this does is it says everything's the same, except it says if the field so if one of the fields here, if its name matches star host star, so if it has the name host somewhere in it, which I do not currently, then put it on the field menu, which would be right here. And then do the action that's here. So basically, if you have a field that has the word host in it, you're going to get an action that shows up called look up the host, and you're basically it's gonna go to a URL called whatismyipaddress.com and fill in $@ field value $, and that will be the name of whatever field this was. So if this was just the field was called host, then this would fill it in with the IP address of the host field. The new target is a new page, so we'll call it blank, and that's it. And the same thing happens here with IP. So if you have a source IP, a new menu item would show up with source IP. I'm sorry, with what's my address for the IP. So these are actually look very similar. The only difference is it's IP versus host. Okay, so now we've looked through workflow actions. We've looked through web.conf, we've looked at app.conf. We've looked at metadata, we've looked at default. Now we have to actually see the code that does this. So let's go to app server. App server is a directory that Splunk's web server works off of. There's two directories here. Let me quickly go over static. It's not very interesting. It's basically the icon for the app and the screenshot, and those are basically used for apps.splunk.com. You can see here that the icon is a 36 by 36 PNG, and the screenshot is a 623 by 350 PNG. You can find all that information on the Splunk on the apps.splunk site. Let's go into the controllers directory. Now we have an init file and a related. So the init file is literally empty. It's empty. You don't need anything there, but Python needs an init file to basically treat this directory as a package. So if you have a directory and you have a file in it and you want to call it the controllers directory, it's generally a good thing. So now here's the meat of the app. Let's go up to the top. This is a custom Python REST endpoint. The best way to work on this is to download this app or an app like this that does something similar, and just work your way through it. I'm going to go quickly through it because the specifics of this app aren't so important. You don't actually have to know how each one of these commands works, but I will walk through it. We're importing cherry pie, we're importing regular expressions, time, logging. We're importing Splunk controllers, decorators, routers. These are sort of things that you'll have to find by trial and error. Splunk.search, so we can actually do Splunk searches. Splunk.utils. I require that I have SID and offset, that'll be used later. I have some constants. Let's go to the meat of the thing. So we have class is called related controller, and it handles the endpoint related. So if you remember, if we go to default workflow actions, remember we have custom workflow related. So related is the endpoint. So we call the class related controller, and we say that it handles /related. We say that it handles get and post requests, and this is index is the method that'll get called. Cherry pipe will provide me with the username, the session key, and then I will be able to get the namespace, SID, offset, and type. Remember, these are arguments right here being passed in. So all I do is they're passed in as keyword arguments, this function. So they're right here, keyword arguments, keyword arguments, keyword arguments. So basically at this point I know the user, I know the session key. The session key is Splunk's, it's a key that's necessary to do searches and other operations in Splunk by this code. But I have my arguments. Then I call my main function, which does the work, which is called getSearch, and that returns me a URL and some arguments. And then what I do is, you can ignore most of this, but the bottom line is I am doing a redirect to that URL. So you click on this, it runs my Python code, it generates a URL and an argument, and then it does a redirect to that location. What does the getSearch do? Well, let's go look. The primary thing it does is it says, hey, if there's no index, let's set it to be main or whatever the value was. Now we have all the different match type. These are type equals alert values, type equals identifying terms, type equals Punk, type equals Google. See this? So that's just one. So if type is Google, then we go and we call another function and we go and get the query terms, we go get a URL from Google, we pass the arguments necessary, Q equals term, and we return the URL and the arguments, and we're done. If the type is mail, then we do the same thing. These are all, the whole point of all this, Punked. Let's do Punked for a second. Search similar formatting. What that'll do is it'll take our search and add the Punked value, so you'll see all the different events that have the same formatting. They look very uniform because they have the same punctuation. See, there's spaces, colon, colon, so you see spaces, colon, colon, a dot, and so on. So if there's punctuation, then what you're going to do is you're going to go to the event that was selected, you're going to grab the punctuation field, and then you're going to change the search to be the punctuation is equal to the value. And we do some hand waving on quoting and backslash quoting. But the bottom line is this function just returns what the URL should be, essentially what the search should be. And then you're done. You return the URL and the arguments. So this function to generate the search, getSearch, is passed to search ID and the offset. But we really don't have the raw text of this event or any of the field values. So how do we get it? Well, I'm calling a function called SE, which is, let's go over here, SE. So this is Splunk.search. It's a Python library interface to Splunk. And I say get the job, and that gives me a job object based on the SID. And then I say based from that job, get the events and get the offset event. So get the 0th event, or the first event, or the second event. And now I've got the event, and that gives me the event. That will give me this event if the offset was 0, and all these different arguments as a Python dictionary. So I can then do things like get the raw or get a particular field value, or get the time. And here I'm converting the time into a different format to get seconds from 1970. But the bottom line is you've got the text of the event. You've got all the values of the event. And from there you can do everything you want. So just to wrap this up, what do we have? In default, we defined our app. In web.conf, we specified that we're creating a new custom REST endpoint called related that will be called. We defined our workflow actions, basically saying all the different things that should be added to the menu. And the URL that they're going to is always going to be custom, the directory of the app, the name of the endpoint, and that was related, so it's in web.conf. Then we go into app server, oops, under controllers, and we have our related Python, and we made a class called related controller with a method called index. We go and get a bunch of our arguments, we do something, and we redirect. And that's it. That is the app. Now that you know how it works, it would be really impressive if you guys could go out there and modify it and add new functions here. This is just a small subset of what's possible. Use your imagination. Think of more things that you would want to do to an event and see if you can do it. Let me know. Send me the code. Maybe I can add it to the app.